You are listening to An Ill-Considered Wager by Suspicious Popsicle, Part 1 of the extremely self-indulgent and not at all serious Pride and Prejudice AU series. Being an intelligent and rational man, capable of learning from past mistakes, Jiang Cheng knew that he shouldn't argue with his adopted brother. Wei Wuxian was a terrible combination of shameless and competitive, which more than once had led to ridiculous arguments taking on a life of their own. He knew that he shouldn't argue foolish notions with Wei Wuxian, and yet, something about that cocky smile, that self-assured laughter, that way he had of waving his hands as if it didn't matter, instead of simply admitting that Jiang Cheng was right. There was something in the sum total of Wei Wuxian's behavior and speech that never failed to set spark to the tinder of Jiang Cheng's temper. And, from there, events tended to unfold out of control as his tongue got the better of him. Getting into a stupid argument was precisely how Jiang Cheng had found himself standing on the second-floor landing of the Luo family's spacious townhouse, surveying the milling crowd below as he searched for his brother, while hoping that even Wei Wuxian's face wasn't thick enough to allow him to make an appearance. Jiang Cheng couldn't even remember how the argument had gotten started. But how could he have been expected to agree to the claim that Wei Wuxian could pass himself off as a woman with no one the wiser? It had been a stupid boast of his brother's part, and Jiang Cheng had refused to say that Wei Wuxian could do it. And somehow, his adherence to reason and his brother's shameless love of mischief had resulted in a bet that Wei Wuxian couldn't make it through a party in a gown without someone pointing out the obvious. They had left the house together, both dressed perfectly respectably, but Wei Wuxian had ordered the driver to stop the carriage and let him out several streets away from the Luo residence. Jiang Cheng hadn't wanted to know what connections his brother had made in the city that would allow him to swap out his new suit for a gown. He'd merely clicked his tongue, too prideful to back down, but certain that this was going to end with both of them being harshly scolded by his mother. It had been nearly an hour since he had arrived, and Jiang Cheng was beginning to hope that Wei Wuxian would not be showing up after all. Perhaps he had tried to gain entry, but been turned away at the door. Perhaps he had been stopped on the street. Perhaps he had been arrested, charged with public indecency, or labelled as a lunatic and then carried off to be locked up, a stain on the Jiang family name. No, he had to stop thinking like that. Knowing Wei Wuxian, he had gotten distracted and stopped to drink or flirt with some pretty girls before he had even made it to wherever he had planned to find a disguise for the evening. The townhouse was packed full, so Jiang Cheng didn't immediately realize that the presence next to him had stopped there purposefully. He paid him no mind until a soft, breathy voice that sounded oh so familiar whispered in his ear, "Who are we looking for?" "Wait!" Jiang Cheng only barely stopped himself from shouting his brother's name as he turned to look. Although the lower half of his face was hidden behind a fan, Jiang Cheng could still tell that he was grinning by the shape and sparkle of his eyes. They had agreed that, should Jiang Cheng reveal the deception, by accident or on purpose, Wei Wuxian would win their bet by default. Annoyance turned quickly to shock as Jiang Cheng actually took in what his brother was wearing. He was dressed in a gown of brilliant red with a contrasting panel of milk-white silk in front. Pale crystal beads studded white on white embroidered vines like tiny flower buds or berries. The gown was padded over his chest to give the illusion of small breasts, and a lacy beaded choker in red and pink ringed his throat. His gloves were white silk, and someone had done up his hair, pinning it atop his head with crystal-studded hairpins. Ringlets framed his face, bouncing with his every movement. "Well?" he asked, revealing his grin as he used both hands to flutter his skirts. "How do I look?" He looked like he might actually win their ill-considered bet. "You look like a buffoon," Jiang Cheng ground out. "You'll be found out in no time. Just admit this was a stupid idea and let's go home." Gasping as if wronged, Wei Wuxian lifted a hand to his chest, eyes wide with put-on shock. "Jiang Cheng, how could I possibly leave before finding Mian Mian to thank her for inviting us?" "You'd better not call her that. She'll figure out it's you. Never mind finding her, how did you find me without me spotting you? I've watched every person who came through that door and I never saw you come in. Wei Wuxian snapped open his fan again and held it over his face as he pressed closer to the rail and peered down. Of course I didn't come in that way. All by myself without an invitation. Who would have let me in? No, I went around the back and snuck in through a window. Clenching his hands on the rail, Jiang Cheng drew a deep breath. He was about to launch into a hushed tirade when Wei Wuxian suddenly leaned forward, staring intently at the people below. "What's he doing here?" he murmured. Following Wei Wuxian's line of sight, Jiang Cheng quickly spotted the person who had caught his attention and cursed under his breath. Lan Wangji had just walked in. The Lans were amongst the wealthiest families in the country. They were certainly one of the strictest, with over 3,000 rules that family members were expected to follow. Not only was Lan Wangji as strict and arrogant as one might expect from such a family, he had a personal dislike for Wei Wuxian that carried over the time they had spent studying abroad at the same school. Even when Wei Wuxian had left, his absence hadn't improved Lan Wangji's opinion of him, given that he had been expelled for fighting. If Lan Wangji spotted him dressed the way he was, there was definitely going to be trouble. Jiang Cheng grabbed his brother's arm. "I'll distract him while you sleep out." "Why would I do that?" Wei Wuxian pulled free, wearing a grin that Jiang Cheng recognized all too well. Lan Chen is, after all, a handsome, Wei Wuxian, wealthy, I'm warning you, extremely available bachelor. What respectable, unattached young lady wouldn't want to catch his interest? Jiang Cheng looked him dead in the eye and said with every shred of conviction he could muster, "If you get us into trouble because you couldn't resist teasing Lan Wangji, I will break both your legs and then murder you." Wei Wuxian had the gall to laugh in his face, and then smack him on the shoulder with his fan, flirtatiously. Jiang Cheng very nearly ripped the thing off his hand and snapped it in half. "Better watch your tone, Jian Wangyi." It was so strange to hear his brother call him by his courtesy name, that the crowd around him, which had faded to irrelevance, was suddenly important once more. He was mostly certain that they had been speaking quietly enough not to be overheard, but... "Your manner is awfully intense towards a woman you've only just met," Wei Wuxian said with a teasing smile. "I'm going to break both your legs on principle," Jiang Cheng muttered back, forcing a smile that he felt sure wasn't fooling anyone. "Just stay away from..." As he glanced back down, he went still. "He's looking at us." Immediately, he heard the snap of the fan as Wei Wuxian opened it to hide the lower half of his face, and leaned once more against the rail. "Oh my," he said in that ridiculously breathy voice. "There's another intense stare. Keep away from him." "Of course! Can't have Lan Chan ruining the fun after all." The problem with telling Jiang Cheng that he wouldn't let Lan Wangji spoil the fun, Wei Wuxian reflected, was that Lan Wangji was infinitely more amusing than the rest of the guests at the party. Mingling in the crowd to hide, Wei Wuxian had accidentally gotten himself trapped on the receiving end of a man's passionate and exceedingly detailed description of the manner and grounds of his patroness. At this rate, he was going to die of boredom before Jiang Cheng could break his legs. Wei Wuxian would have made his escape long ago if he hadn't been perfectly positioned in a corner with a good view of the room and in easy reach of the buffet tables. Now, however, he was at the end of his patience. He was bored. He wanted to talk to someone interesting. He wanted to dance. He might be a bit tipsy, but that had never stopped him before. On top of all that, he had lost sight of his brother and Lan Wangji. One going missing wouldn't have been strange, but both at once? The townhouse wasn't that large. What if Jiang Cheng had pulled Lan Wangji aside to create a bit of misdirection? Tell him how unfortunate it was that Wei Wuxian hadn't been able to come tonight. Definitely wasn't attending the party at all. What if he told Lan Wangji that Wei Wuxian had died? The absurdity of the thought made him laugh. which was apparently all he'd needed to do in order to drive off the odd little man who took offense at the notion of a drawing room color scheme being laughed at. Or something. Wei Wuxian wasn't fully paying attention to his grumbling as he walked off, too caught up in wondering how Lan Wangji would react to news of his untimely death. Tears were entirely out of the question, but would he be shocked? He had called Wei Wuxian reckless a number of times, so perhaps it wouldn't come as a surprise. He would at least be polite about it. He might not like Wei Wuxian, but he was such a stickler for proper behavior and decorum that... Someone cleared his throat next to him, and when Wei Wuxian turned to look, he nearly leapt away in surprise. Lan... He snapped the fan open and fluttered it in front of his face, having barely remembered in time to use his courtesy name. Wangji, good evening, your reputation precedes you. That could have been a disaster. Using someone's birth name was considered terribly rude, unless one was family or a close friend. It would have been unthinkable for a woman Lan Wangji had never met to use it. Of course, Wei Wuxian was definitely close with Lan Wangji, even if Lan Wangji didn't care much for him. He kept the fan up over his face, finding that he was at a loss for words under Lan Wangji's scrutiny. Why was he staring so openly? Did he suspect? He couldn't have seen through the disguise already. If he had, he would be dragging Wei Wuxian from the party, calling him ridiculous and shameless and other such obvious things. Not knowing what to do, as he hadn't bothered getting into character beyond giggling behind his fan, he returned Lan Wangji's stare. Even among his peers, Lan Wangji stood out. He looked as flawless as ever, as though the dust and dirt of the mortal world wouldn't dare cling to him. His tailcoat was the pale blue of the sky at dawn, soft and perfectly fitted, accented with silver buttons. Beneath it, his waistcoat was also blue, but of an even lighter shade, and shining with moon-silver embroidery like swirling clouds. His hair was tied back in a loose plait, with 2 locks left free to frame his beautiful, impassive face. He looked like a fairy prince from some airy, mountainous realm, descending to observe humans as he walked among them while holding himself aloof. That wouldn't do at all. Grinning behind his fan, Wei Wuxian took the liberty of breaking the silence by introducing himself. I am Shu Yanmei, he announced, offering his hand. Pleased to make your acquaintance. For a moment, Lan Wangji merely stared. Just as Wei Wuxian thought he might not respond at all, however, he not only took the offered hand, but raised it to his lips. The pleasure is mine, he murmured, holding eye contact and making the rote phrase feel unexpectedly intimate. The faintest hint of warmth reached Wei Wuxian's knuckles through his glove, and a thrill of delight shot up his spine. Lan Wangji hadn't recognized him. Even better, who would have thought the reserved second jade of the Lan family could be so charming when speaking to a lady? I must say, it's certainly a surprise seeing you here. I'd heard that you don't care for parties. I do not. No? One can hardly tell. Although... His grin stretched even wider, still hidden behind his fan. I have yet to see you dance. Lan Wangji merely stared. Knowing he was being reckless, but flooded with a bright, restless energy, Wei Wuxian couldn't find it himself to care, as he offered his arm the way a gentleman might. Won't you pardon me for this next dance? In all honesty, he wasn't even sure if Lan Wangji could dance. Given his station in life, he ought to have learned, but Wei Wuxian had never actually seen him do so. On the rare occasion that they had both attended the same party, he'd only ever seen Lan Wangji lurking around the edges of the room, avoiding being drawn into conversation, only marginally less successful than he avoided the dance floor. Such a stick in the mud, Wei Wuxian thought. You must have had lessons. What's the point if you don't make use of them? As he was about to lower his arm, Lan Wangji moved to stand next to him, positioning Wei Wuxian's hand on his own arm in the proper manner for a gentleman to escort a lady. He said nothing, merely stared straight ahead as he led them to where people were taking their places for the next dance. The tension in him thrummed beneath Wei Wuxian's palm, as if he was anxious. Had he only accepted to be polite? Was he actually a poor dancer? The thought of finally finding something that Lan Wangji didn't excel at left Wei Wuxian grinning helplessly. He could barely wait for the music to begin. His excitement turned out to be premature. Lan Wangji was, as anyone might have expected from the second jade of the Lan family, an excellent dancer. His movements were precise and graceful, not a second out of time with the music. The only thing that kept Wei Wuxian from calling him a perfect dancer was that expression of his, which made it seem as if life was nothing but endless tedium, from which he took no joy. There he was, in the middle of a party on a lovely night, parted with a beautiful girl, yet he couldn't contrive to smile even the tiniest bit. At least his eyes didn't wander. As Wei Wuxian whirled around the dance, laughing as he was handed off between other dancers, he caught glimpses of Lan Wangji watching him. Even when other girls clasped hands briefly with Lan Wangji before being twirled off again, his attention was focused solely on Wei Wuxian. In all likelihood, he was merely wondering why Xu Yanmei looked so familiar. Even knowing that couldn't entirely dim Wei Wuxian's sense of triumph, however. During the brief time they had attended the same school, it had been nearly impossible to get Lan Wangji's attention, much less hold it for any length of time. Lan Wangji would be furious if he realized who he was dancing with. As the music drew to a close, and the dancers found themselves facing their original partners once more, Wei Wuxian caught sight of Jiang Cheng on the edge of the crowd. His brother's glare was harsh enough to make him wince. Already the lecture Jiang Cheng was going to give him was sounding in his mind, complete with threats to break his legs. His expression must have been awfully concerning, because Lan Wangji finally looked away from him, glancing back over his shoulder to find out what it was he'd seen. He had to have noticed Jiang Cheng, but obviously he didn't put the pieces together, because he simply squeezed Wei Wuxian's hand a bit tighter and finished the dance. They each stepped back. Wei Wuxian curtsied as Lan Wangji bowed, and then, before the last note had completely faded, he was excusing himself and hurrying away. Knowing his brother, any hesitation would have resulted in Jiang Cheng grabbing his arm and dragging him off in front of everyone, and that certainly wouldn't go over well. Despite the crowds, Wei Wuxian managed to find a nook near the base of the stairs where he and Jiang Cheng could speak with some limited privacy, provided they kept their voices down. He turned to see Jiang Cheng bearing down on him, and hid a smile behind his fan as he watched his brother check his impulse to grab him and give him a shake.
"What were you thinking?"
Jiang Cheng whispered.
"How does staying away from someone lead to dancing with them? He cornered me. What was I supposed to do? Xu Yanmei wouldn't have let a chance like that slip out of her grasp." "Who is Xu Yanmei?"
"You looking at her?" Wei Wuxian batted his eyes at Jiang Cheng just to see how red he would turn. He wasn't disappointed.
"You are not Xu Yanmei,"
Jiang Cheng ground out.
"You are Wei Wuxian, and you are an idiot."
"Better keep your voice down," Wei Wuxian warned, only barely holding back the urge to tap Jiang Cheng with his fan.
"If I'm found out because of you, I win by default. Talking to you should be outlawed,"
he shot back bitterly.
"Oh, go enjoy the party, Jiang Cheng. I had been planning on looking out for you, but never mind that. Do as you will. When your charade is exposed, I'll be claiming ignorance of the whole thing."
"Lovely talking to you," Wei Wuxian called after him as he turned and stormed off.
"Now, I think I've earned another drink."
Several drinks and a number of dances later, Wei Wuxian made his way carefully through the crowded hall and out the door leading to the back garden. He just needed a bit of air. While the dress was doubtlessly cooler than the clothes he should have been wearing, he was still burning up. The night breeze was a blessing against his heated skin, and he stepped to the side of the door, leaning back against the cool brick of the townhouse. He could hear other people in the garden, but the lights hadn't been lit or had gone out. It was too dark to make out details, and what words were spoken were too quiet to overhear. Pleasantly tipsy, he decided that he didn't care, and let it all wash over him. He couldn't have been there a full 2 minutes before the door opened and someone else slipped out. As close as they were, and with the faint moonlight illuminating his pale clothing, it was easy to recognize Lan Wangji even in the dim light. "Ah, Lan-chan, whoops." He took a sip of his wine. "Lan Wangji, did you finally tired of holding up the walls?" There was a soft click as the door closed. Then Lan Wangji moved to stand in front of him, hiding him from the view of those out in the garden proper. He seemed to loom over Wei Wuxian, who giggled as he slumped against the house. "You only parted me for one dance," he said, pouting. "After that, every time I saw you, you were standing around near the wall. Where's your sense of fun, Lan-chan? Why come to a party if you don't like to dance or flirt with pretty girls?" He grinned over his glass and drank down the last of it. As he lowered his hand, Lan Wangji took the empty wine glass from him and set it aside on a small table. Raising Wei Wuxian's gloved hand to his lips, he kissed his knuckles. As Wei Wuxian stared, breath caught in his throat, Lan Wangji gently turned his hand over to kiss the inside of his wrist. "I would like to see you again," Lan Wangji said in the darkness. His eyes glinted with reflected starlight. Wei Wuxian couldn't help it. He laughed. Late in the evening the next day, Lan Xichen sought out his brother. He found him in the library, gazing out the window at the moon, a book open but forgotten in his hands. "Wangji, is everything all right? You seemed strange at dinner this evening." Slowly, his brother collected his thoughts from where they had wandered and glanced at him. "I met them last night." "Met who?" "The one," he said, turning his eyes back up to the night sky. "The one I will marry, if I marry at all."